Right now on Upfront.
The Trump factor.
We have great unity. We have great common sense.
48 hours out, former President Donald Trump returns to Wisconsin. The meetings on Capitol Hill.
Well, I think it was very clear what I meant.
The Milwaukee comments and the fallout.
To insult the state that's hosting your convention, I think is kind of bizarre. Actually, it's kind of unhinged in a way.
I don't think that's the context at all, Matt. I'm saying that we were talking about specific issues, not the city of Milwaukee.
This Sunday, Republican U.S. Senator Ron Johnson. Reaction from Wisconsin's Republican delegation. Then Ann Jacobs, a Democrat and the newly elected chair of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, less than 5 months from Election Day.
Then January 6th.
We know what a bloodbath looks like. We saw one on January 6th.
2 Capitol Police officers now in Wisconsin on the trail for the Biden campaign.
It's Donald Trump who did it. I can't change the fact that he's a Republican, and I can't change the fact that he's a politician.
The politics of that day intensifying, now one-on-one with us, just moments away.
This is Upfront with Jaron Jordan and political director Matt Smith.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Happy Father's Day. Former President Donald Trump expected to enter a scene on Tuesday. It's his latest campaign stop and third to Wisconsin this year alone. Now, just 4 weeks from the start of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee, construction well underway this weekend inside Fiserv Forum.
All this just days after Trump's visit to Capitol Hill and those comments calling Milwaukee a horrible city. Trump says he was talking about the election and crime.
Well, I think it was very clear what I meant. I said we're very concerned with crime. I love Milwaukee. I have great friends in Milwaukee. But it's, as you know, the crime numbers are terrible, and we have to be very careful.
Trump going on to say in that Fox interview, but I was referring also to the election, the ballots, the way it went down. It was very bad in Milwaukee, very bad. Wisconsin's delegation is here reacting. Ann Jacobs, the newly elected Democratic chair of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, standing by. But we begin with Republican U.S. Senator Ron Johnson. Senator, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Well, Matt, good to be with you.
A lot to get to this weekend. I want to first start with these remarks from Trump that kind of taken on a life of their own. Trump said in an interview with Fox he was talking about crime and elections when he called Milwaukee a horrible city, talking with House Republicans. I'm curious, in that context, do Republicans, do you agree with him on that?
Well, first of all, I wasn't in the room. The people who were in the room deny he said that. He denies he said that. So this has been distorted. But unfortunately, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and the rest of the mainstream media throughout the country are quoting him. There's no video.
Well, he came out on Fox.
I'll take his word. He was, if he was expressing any concern, he was concerned about the issues, the problems that are undeniable in Milwaukee.
And that's what I'm saying. He came out on Fox and said he was talking about the election and crime when he made those comments.
Again, there's no direct quote. He's denying it. So why is the news media putting up a quote that there's absolutely no evidence of, quite honestly? And again, I'm sure if he spoke anything, I'll take him at his word. He was concerned, as we should all be, about the problems in Milwaukee. After decades of Democrat governance, our school systems aren't working. We have crime, murders, hijackings. There's some real issues that need to be addressed, not only in Milwaukee, but other big cities generally run by Democrats. That's undeniable.
In terms of the election, are you comfortable with the city of Milwaukee looking ahead to November?
Well, I have my concerns. It's one of the reasons that Republicans made sure that we recruited 5,000 poll workers. Hopefully we'll have every poll observer shift filled. And by the way, I hope Democrats do too. I think that's the best control we can have over the process, is having bipartisan eyes on the process, making sure that everything's on the up and up. I think we made some strides in 2022 with those poll workers and observers. We can do a lot more, but I feel better now than I did after 2020.
I was going to say, and to that, you told the Cap Times last month, quote, "We have to see exactly what happens." You were asked if you would accept the 2024 results. What would cause you not to?
Well, first of all, we all want to be able to have confidence that the election has integrity, that the results are accurate. That's what we want. Unfortunately, because we have a governor who would not sign reforms to provide those controls, provide that confidence, again, it's a hypothetical at this point in time. I know Democrats are pushing the envelope, but they want to make it easy to cheat. That's just obvious. That's what they want to do. That's what mail-in balloting is about. That's what, all this, the fact that they won't clean up elections or Wisconsin's election rolls, the voter rolls, the voter files, that they won't do that. Why not? Why won't they make sure that we have confidence in our election result?
We are just about a month away from the convention in Milwaukee. A lot of talk about Milwaukee right now. Is the city ready to host this event?
I think so. One of the reasons that that Milwaukee was chosen is they did all the groundwork to host the DNC convention. Now, obviously, because of COVID, that didn't happen. So the security plans are in place. The hotel rooms were identified. So, no, I think Milwaukee was definitely ready for it, which is why the RNC chose Milwaukee. I'm looking forward to it. And again, I'm hoping that when all's said and done, everybody leaves from Milwaukee with a great impression of the city, of the people. That's why I'm concerned about the U.S. Secret Service not kind of digging their heels in right now in that protest zone. That has to be addressed.
What is your greatest concern when it comes to the security zone around the RNC?
I mean, the proximity is ridiculous. It is way too close. I'm not too concerned about Wisconsinites. We're nice people. We're going to be very welcoming. I'm concerned about outside agitators being bussed in and then being put in a protest zone, literally right next to where convention goers are going to be passing by, a block away from the convention site. That needs to be moved.
And where we are today, you don't have any additional insight on the security zone?
Well, I'm hearing that the Secret Service might be releasing some new plans next week, so I'll withhold my comments right now. I was not satisfied with my discussion with the Director of Secret Service. She had the authority to establish a plan. Now she claims she doesn't have the authority to change it. I think that is absurd. The plan has to be changed. I'd like to see Mayor Johnson step up the plate and demand change as well. Again, this is in all of our best interests. Governor Evers ought to be demanding change as well as, obviously the Republican Party is we're asking for this concern to be addressed.
You've been briefed on security plans, and you feel comfortable with where we sit today, 4 weeks out?
Well, yeah, I've spoken to the people in charge of it, and they're certainly dedicated. We were able to, on a bipartisan basis, get an appropriation so that they could bring in law enforcement from outside the city, outside the state. So I know that the law enforcement professionals are dedicated to ensuring security. We just need to have a plan that makes their job as easy as possible.
U.S. Senator Ron Johnson. Senator, like always, hey, thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Have a good day. Stay well.
Looking ahead to Election Day, the Wisconsin Elections Commission had just confirmed its new chair on the bipartisan commission, Democrat Ann Jacobs. She led the commission through the 2020 election and the fallout.
Ann joins us now. Ann, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start with these Trump comments that are receiving attention. He told Fox in part when he talked about a horrible city, I was referring to the election, the ballots, the way it went down. It was very bad in Milwaukee, very, very bad. I'm curious your response to that.
Well, I rather imagine from his perspective it was very, very bad because he didn't win Milwaukee. He lost Milwaukee by tens of thousands of votes. So I rather imagine from his perspective, Milwaukee was not a good city from him. From the perspective of were the elections properly run in Milwaukee, they absolutely were. And I expect Milwaukee to do the same thing in 2024.
In terms of Milwaukee and the new changeover at the commission, do you have confidence in the new head of the Milwaukee Election Commission, Paulina Gutierrez?
I've only met her briefly, but certainly if the mayor has faith in her, then I do. Remember, elections aren't run by one person. Elections are run by the systems and by all the different people in place in large communities like this. And the city of Milwaukee is running a good operation, and I see no reason why that would stop.
With the former president's comments on Milwaukee, and even with Trump continuing to claim that he falsely claimed that he won Wisconsin in 2020, how is the commission preparing for whatever happens leading up to and even after Election Day?
One of the things that we do very aggressively is encourage people to go to elections.wi.gov, our official website, when they have questions about elections, to not believe everything they see on TikTok or on Telegram or on Truth Social or what have you, when it comes to these election conspiracy theories. In 2020, we did a really good job of putting out FAQs, trying to answer some of the crazier concerns, and we'll be doing that again this year. And I think it's really important for people to know that we are a reliable resource about what's actually going on in elections.
And as you know, Trump and others have continued to target Megan Wolf, the administrator of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, some lawmakers continuing to call for her impeachment. If faith in elections is low, especially among Republicans, which could be 47, 48% of the state, why not make a change at the top of the Elections Commission?
Megan Wolf has done an outstanding job. And the idea that we would not have her be our administrator because people believe in conspiracy theories is not how you run good government. She's done an excellent job. She continues to do good work as the chief elections official for the state of Wisconsin. And I don't think we should be saying that people should be fired because people believe that Italian thermostats were controlling our elections.
The governor has implemented or approved extra security for her. We've talked about this before, documented some of the threats targeting her. What is the current state of affairs from your perspective on this?
I know that she and the entire commission are grateful to the governor for that increased security for her. No government official should feel afraid to do their job because of threats from other people. I know I would not be surprised if those threats increase going into November, but it is my hope that instead people start looking at what's actually going on and that sort of violent rhetoric simmers down.
How can you characterize some of the threats post-2020 and now leading up to 2024?
We have been told to not be too specific because of the nature of the security risks and the actions taken in protection of Administrator Wolf. But I can tell you that some of them are threats to her safety and her family's safety and well-being. And some of them have been treated as very legitimate. In other words, from people who had plans and intents and opportunities to do harm. So my hope is that those threats dissipate. I'm not necessarily optimistic about that, but that's my sincere hope.
Ann Jacobs, the newly elected chair of the Wisconsin Elections Commission. Hey, Ann, like always, thank you for your time.
Thank you both.
Up next, the January 6th Capitol Police officers in Wisconsin.
Is this really happening, and how does it end?
The politics of that day, these officers now on the campaign trail. We're one-on-one next.